Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It was 20 years ago today. Sergeant Pepper taught the band to play. They've been going in and out of style, but they're guaranteed to raise a smile. John Lennon and Paul McCartney. Lily, Roy, and Bucky. Lily is 18. Her brother, Roy, is 16. Bucky is 17. They are of lower middle-class families. Lily. My grandmother tell us things about the Depression. You can read about it too. What they tell us is different than what you read. Roy. They're always telling us that we should be glad we got food and all that, 'cause back in the 30s, they used to tell us people were starving and got no jobs and all that stuff. Lily. The food lines they told us about. Roy. Yeah, you had to stay in line and wait for food. Lily. And everything. You got when it was there. If it wasn't, then you made without it. She said there was a lot of waiting. Bucky. I never had a depression, so it don't bother me really. Roy. From what you hear, you'd hate to live in that time. Bucky. Well, I ain't living in that time. Roy. We really don't know what it would be like. It seems like a long time ago. Lily. There's a time I remember being hungry, living away from home. I didn't have anybody to depend on. But they didn't leave home. They stay home where it's at. Roy. Like little things when you're home. Where's the butter? If there's no butter, you go out and buy it. But like them people, where's the butter? No butter. You gotta wait till you get the butter. Lily. Maybe it was margarine. Roy. Now you just walk into your house and sit down, turn on the TV, walk out into the kitchen, get a glass of milk or something, watch a football game, baseball game for a few hours. They couldn't do that. If they were hungry and there was nothing there, they'd just have to wait. Bucky. When my parents talk, you should be glad and happy that we got all this now. The clothes you're wearing, the food we eat, and all that stuff. Lily. They used to tell us about this one silver dollar that they had. Whenever they ran out, it was this silver dollar they used to take down on the little shop on the corner and get $1's worth of food. They'd give the silver dollar. The guy'd hold it for them, and when they got $1 of currency, they could take it in and get their silver dollar back. I think we'd hurt more now if we had a depression. You don't see how they'd make it if it happened to them again, because you take a lot of things for granted. I mean, you see them now and they have everything. You can't imagine how they would act if they didn't have it. If they would even remember what they did. 'Cause they're past it now. They already done it, and they figure they're over it. If we fell now, I think everybody would take it a lot harder. Everybody'd step on each other. They'd just walk all over and kill each other. They got more than they ever need, that they just step on anybody to keep it. They got cars, they got houses, they got this and that. It's more than they need, but they think they need it, so they want to keep it. Human life isn't as important as what they got. Diane, a 27-year-old journalist. Every time I've encountered the Depression, it has been used as a barrier in a club. It's been a counter-communication. Older people use it to explain to me that I can't understand anything. I didn't live through the Depression. They never say, we can't understand you because we didn't live through the Leisure Society. All attempts at communication are totally blocked. All of a sudden, there's a generation gap. It's a frightening thing. What they're saying is, for 20 years, I've starved and I've worked hard. You must fight. It's very Calvinistic. Work, suffer, have 20 lashes a day, and you can have a bowl of bean soup. I've never understood a society of want. We don't have a society of want, not on a general level. We have a society of total surplus, unwanted goods, and unwanted people. The society I was raised in, you got into a car and you were driven to a high school, where you didn't do a lot of work and you got A's. I thought white gloves was the total protection. It was the ultimate armor. To me, the Depression is old newsreels in the term the soup line and Grapes of Wrath, with Harry Fonda looking sincere and downcast. I can identify with the Industrial Revolution sooner than I can with the Depression, because that was an instance of men being thrown out of work by things beyond their control. I never could understand why the Depression occurred. Perhaps that's why I've not been as sympathetic as I'm expected to be. You're supposed to admire them because they've been in the flaring 20s, is that what it's called? Where they danced a lot and drank gin in automobiles. Hail F. Scott Fitzgerald. The connection is not made economically, but socially. It runs from the morally errant generation of the 20s, with the too short skirts and the bathtub gin, the rise of the stock market, and bad poetry. It's all confused in my mind. Prohibition comes in somewhere. I'm not quite sure whether it preceded or came after the Depression. And then there's Al Capone and people on film in wonderfully wide-shouldered suits with machine guns gunning down other people. It's an incredible historical jungle. It's cinematically very mixed up, terribly fluid. Andy, 19. When I was at Cornell, a documentary film group showed The River, the Per Lawrence thing, a fantastic movie. So much of it is this sentimental Renaissance-type feeling, which they got out of the TVA, which I'm sure sprung up out of the Depression, sort of regeneration and so on. The poem that Lawrence wrote with all the names of the rivers, so derivative, but sort of nice when you listen to it. The great thing about the river. And people were laughing all through the movie. Laughing at all the corny lines. I was so horrified. It sort of hurt me. I said to the faculty guy, "What's the matter with these people?" He said, "It doesn't mean anything to them." So, I suppose that's the way it goes. Michael, 19. What does the Depression mean to me? I don't know. I'm not depressed. I can pot out anytime I want. A depression to me is when I can sit down on my Shea lounge and have a beer in this boob tube right in my face. Tad, 20. It's something that has been filtered through my parents. I didn't know much about it, and they didn't mind my not knowing much about it. They control the source of information, sort of like the high priest. You can't approach the altar too closely or you'll be struck dead. This purple heart in their background has become a justification for their present affluence. If we got the idea they didn't have it so bad, they'd have less psychological control over us. That's why they don't approve of the hippies. These people are saying, our parents told us it was this way. Now we're doing it and it's not so bad. Our parents don't like that. They want to keep it a secret. They try to control the information that filters down to us. They're screwed up, and they don't want people to find out about it. They say, you have it soft now. The point is, they have it soft now. They sort of feel guilty about it. If they make other people feel guilty about it, it won't be so noticeable in their own instance. Nancy, 21. Money is one of my father's big values. He wishes he was a millionaire. I don't think of money in that way. I think of it as a sideline, as something you have to have, but I don't think day and night about it. Marshall and Steve. Marshall is 23. Steve is 21. They had both attended college. One edits a syndicated service for underground newspapers. The other manages a coffee house. Marshall. I never really thought much about the Depression until last year when I was at Resurrection City. I guess the first time there was a March of the Poor, soldiers cleared the people off and there was a lot of fighting. The Depression is something I don't think about. I guess I should. It's been no part of my experience. Steve. It means something very personal to me. My mother graduated high school when she was young and had a chance to go to college. But she had to go to work. Her parents were starving. Her life since has been one unremitting struggle to make do. I think of dreams people had they were forced to give up in order to stay in American society, to make a buck, like my mother did. Crushed hope. It gets across to me that there were a great many Americans who were ashamed of the Depression. I remember the McCarthy period. People were recanting what they had done during the Depression and publicly proving they were ashamed of what they had done. Marshall. The Depression is an embarrassing thing. It is a shame to the system, the American way that seemed so successful. All of a sudden, things broke down and didn't work. It's a difficult thing to understand today. To imagine this system, all of a sudden, for reasons having to do with paper, money, abstract things, breaking down. In a lot of young people's minds today, it's proof of the irrationality of this kind of economic system. After all, there were all those factories and all those people who wanted to work. There was the equipment, yet nothing was being worked. Today, if we had great storehouses of grain, if they wouldn't be opened up immediately to feed people who are starving, people would take guns and see that they were opened up. People are not imprisoned by the idea that you don't have a right to food. Why should people starve to death when there is food? Steve. Many times, young people are told idealism is fine for youth, but there comes a point when one must face up to the realities of existence. That lesson was learned during the Depression, at least by my parents. They were forced to give up their idealism, forced to face the hard realities of making a buck to stay alive. This lesson was so hard learned, they felt it necessary to transmit it to us. These experiences have come to me secondhand. I see its effects. I repudiate it. I have repudiated the kind of life my parents were forced into. I repudiate the lessons that they seem to have learned. Marshall. The issue between the generations is what is known as value. The value of the dollar. What it means to your generation is blood, sweat, and tears. What you had to do to make a buck. When a group of young people burnt money at the stock exchange and threw the bills down from the balcony, it caused pandemonium. There was a scramble for the dollar bills on the floor of the exchange. They were trying to say something about the value of money. A Vietnamese person can be burned by napalm. Animals are slaughtered, but a dollar is sacred. A dollar is not to be burned. In fact, it's a federal crime. This worship of the dollar is inherently an alienated idea. The people who killed themselves in 1929 were victims of it. Steve. Our quality of life character and tone since the 30s has been determined by the Depression. The buck is almighty. Which side are you on? Most people, and that would include the young, would choose the buck. Can you recreate, at least in your imaginations, the tone of the Great Depression? Marshall. Fear. It unsettled the securities, apparently false securities, that people had. People haven't felt unfearful since. Fear of communists, fear of people living in sin, fear of the hippies, fear, fear, fear. I think people learned it from the Depression. Money brings security. That was the idea. But it turned out to be just the opposite. If you have a great big house, that meant you had to be fearful again. Someone might rob you. If you had a great big store, you had to be fearful now that there's going to be a riot, and everything in your store would be stolen. See, money brings more fear than security. Steve. Fear is an emotion people don't talk about, but it's one they reflect in their lives. My parents have managed to overcome a good deal of it. When I resisted the draft, they were with me every step of the way. But at the beginning, when I was joining the demonstrations, they were afraid my father would lose his job. Fear was so obvious you could taste it. That you were going to do something which might wreck your chance of achieving the economic success they never had. I can't imagine that fear without the Depression. It shaped their lives and consciences. I got the feeling it was a time of utter chaos, in which there were no road signs. The moral and social guideposts had been wiped out. Why wasn't there more violence in that period? What shape did that violence take? What happened? Was it government pump priming? Or was it the Second World War that pulled us out of the Depression? I don't know enough of this period from the cold printed page. Postscript. Marshall committed suicide, November 1st, 1969.